We are following breaking news. U.S. military forces shot down a second object over U.S. airspace earlier today.
This comes less than 1 week after the Biden administration ordered a Chinese spy balloon to be shot down. National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, announced today the Department of Defense had been tracking a high-altitude object flying over Alaska. Now, its exact location was not immediately specified, but the Federal Aviation Administration issued a flight restriction notice for the area near Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope.
The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object, and they did, and it came inside our territorial waters. Those waters right now are frozen, but inside territorial airspace and over territorial waters.
Joining us now is Michael J. Szanto. He's a foreign policy expert and has been following these updates today. Thanks for being with us. There's very little we know about this specific object as the U.S. government now aims to gather what has been shot down. But the communication seems to be more rapid from the White House and the Pentagon, now less than a week after the Chinese object was shot down after some debate when it flew over U.S. airspace. What are your thoughts on this object, the announcement, and what we know so far?
Well, we don't know a lot yet. The Pentagon hasn't released that much information. But what we are seeing is that the U.S. military is really looking for these objects and being very vigilant and proactive on it. And so that's why I think they took rapid action here. Did
it surprise you at all, the announcement made Friday?
No, I mean, I think that we're in a different world today. The Pentagon realized that there is a potential gap in our ability to detect these things. So it's working on addressing it because adversaries and enemies could do all kinds of things with us. So they're looking for these things. In this case, it's a little bit lower, so it could pose a threat to civilian aviation. And the U.S. military did not, and the Biden administration didn't want anyone to mistake the fact that we allowed the balloon before to go across our country as some sign of weakness. So they wanted to show, don't try it, we can shoot it down immediately, and it won't even cross over Alaska. So they wanted to send a signal of strength, and then also address any gaps in our ability to monitor for these kind of objects.
How rare is it for the U.S. to shoot down a second object less than a week after shooting down the first?
Oh my God, I mean, it's incredibly rare. I'm not sure that we have seen shoot downs of objects in the proximity of American airspace. God, we could probably go for decades. I could be forgetting about something, but I don't think there is really a precedent for this. But the thing that was disturbing about the Chinese surveillance balloon is it appeared to be going after and targeting all of our strategic sites, possibly even where our subs, which are a most important part of our strategic triad, and also strategic bomber base and strategic missiles. So that was very disturbing. Apparently, we're able to neutralize and mitigate and gather intelligence about that abilities, but we don't want to create an impression there's an open door for such objects to survey us or commit other acts of mischief against our country. So I think it sends a powerful signal. And now we have to find out, as we get information, exactly what this object was.
And we should be transparent and acknowledge that the U.S. certainly has covert operations, spy operations in many other countries, surely China as well. I think what's jarring is that while often this is the type of thing that happens behind the scenes, this is all spilling out into public view now as there appears to be some type of deterioration in relationship between the U.S. and China. What's your view, and where do you rank the relationship between the two nations right now?
Well, for one thing, we have to be sure it's China. I don't know that we're entirely sure it is China.
On the second object, that's correct.
Right. We have to also make sure that it's military. This time it could be a weather balloon. There's some military analysts even questioning that, just because it's very early on, but the U.S. military is not taking any chances. And last time there was a little bit of a dilemma. If you shoot down an object over the continental United States, what if, God forbid, the fragments of that object kill somebody, an American or anyone else on our territory? If this is in fact a military object from China, and let's say, I'm not sure we can rule out even Russia, even possibly Iran, although the geography there would be China or Russia primarily, but these balloons can go very far. This is not necessarily as advanced a balloon. It is a violation of international law. We have in the past flown high altitude planes over hostile countries, including U-2, possibly the Blackbird, and sometimes that could be under stealth. But you really are violating another country's airspace. And that's actually fundamentally a hostile act. That's why American spy planes overwhelmingly operate from international waters. So I'm not sure that we would be flying planes over countries that we're not in open hostility with. It's sort of a subtle precedent that in orbit, even low Earth orbit, that's okay. We all have spy satellites. But to actually intrude upon a country's airspace, to the best of my knowledge, is a violation of international law. And basically, I would say an act of hostility to violate without permission. And the United States responded with a reciprocal act of hostility, obviously, to respond to what is sort of attack. We shot down the balloon. So the first object, that is. And that was a very, very large, very advanced balloon. We need to find out what this object is, though. And we don't have that much information yet.
Given the uncertainty that we still have regarding that second object, overall, though, what do you think this says about the current state of our national security? Should Americans be concerned? Because as you point out, this second object, if it turns out that it is attached to a country, that it was in fact deliberately sort of sent for whatever purpose, as you say, it could be construed as an act of hostility. I mean, should Americans be concerned about that?
Yes, I mean, an overt act of hostility, we should be concerned. I would actually be shocked, but we don't know what's going on. If it is in fact Chinese, and it turns out that they deliberately sent an object into our airspace. Now, over the last 7 to 10 years, we've seen overt acts of hostility from Russia. We saw things in terms of Syria and elsewhere, probably the sabotaging and explosion of the pipeline, which was Norwegian, but that's actually a NATO ally. We are seeing very overt acts and covert acts of hostility on the part of the Russians. The balloon, technically, I would say, was a hostile act by the Chinese, targeting our most sensitive sites, intruding upon our airspace. I think it is concerning, and there is a change in the geopolitical situation, which is for the first time in history, the United States is increasingly facing off with 2 nuclear superpowers. China really never constituted a nuclear superpower, but they're starting to become one. Economic superpower, perhaps, large conventional forces, but they are engaged in a large military nuclear buildup. And so we are in a concerning situation militarily in today's world.
All right, so much to continue to keep an eye on. Michael Szanto. Michael, thanks very much for sharing your insight with us.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.